Familiar words from the Gospel of Luke. Now in this same district there were shepherds out in the fields keeping watch over their flocks by night. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone round them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy for all people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." Joy. We do so want Christmas to be joyful, don't we? If there's one time of the year that arouses the perfectionist in all of us, this is surely it. We want everything to look right and taste right and feel right and go right. Imagine the horror of the church secretary who got the bulletin back from the printer to read that the choir would be singing, "I heard the bills on Christmas Day." But I like 90-year-old Marie, who found that shopping for Christmas gifts had just become too much of a burden, so she decided to send checks to everyone instead. So on each card she wrote simply, "Buy your own present," and then mailed them. Well, she enjoyed the usual flurry of family festivities with the gang that year. Only after Christmas did she get around to clearing off her cluttered desk. Under a stack of papers, she was horrified to find all the checks that she'd forgotten to put in the cards. So much for our efforts at Christmas joy, our attempt at holiday cheer. But how about the real Christmas question? Is there any authentic joy in this kind of world? Real joy, a deep underlying, sustaining satisfaction that modulates between contentment and exhilaration. Is it possible, even proper, to think of living that kind of joy in a world where cancer wipes out kids and the Bin Ladens and Husseins run wild, where drunk drivers mutilate the beautiful and thugs terrorize our streets? Do we have a right to joy when so many grieve tragic loss? Do we even have a right to rejoice when so many are hungry and homeless and lonely and oppressed? In the midst of this truly sad world, how take our joy with any kind of integrity and good conscience? Except, some of the most truly hurting seem to find joy in precisely this kind of world. It seems, in a way, their armor against this very world. One of them was a young man, sick and frail as an infant and delicate and subject to illness all his life. He went into the Christian ministry, but his sufferings were so severe that he could no longer serve a congregation. So pretty well shut in, he took to writing letters to friends and strangers, letters of hope and good cheer. He complained to a friend once about the harsh and uncouth hymn texts of his day. And so his friend challenged him to try and write some better ones. So he did. He wrote over 600 of them, hymns of praise and joy. When his health finally broke in 1748 and he left us, he left behind one of the most remarkable collection of hymns the world has ever known. His name, Isaac Watts, who penned the lines and the hymn, "Joy to the world, the Lord has come." This is precisely the promise the Christmas angel gave to the impoverished shepherd outcasts on a lonely night 2,000 years ago. "Hear me now, I bring you good news of great joy." And the wise men rejoiced to find the star again, and Mary rejoiced that God looked upon her in her mean estate. And the manger babe became a man who was characterized more than anything else by his joy. In your mind's eye, do you ever see Jesus laughing? Even in the midst of humility and rejection and suffering and death, joy. And he said that my joy may be in you. So what is this strange, almost alien joy that is both legitimate and possible in the face of this often joyless world? Well, it's first of all the joy that does come of life embraced. Joy to the world, why? Because the Lord has come, because The mystery behind the universe, who tossed the stars in space, has entered in some strange, mysterious way, has entered into our human story. Or to put it another way, the Christmas story is God's affirmation of life in precisely this world. And when we learn to see it, life, as a precious gift, and live it in gratitude no matter what comes, we do discover a kind of joy that sustains even in the midst of sadness and gray. Christians learn to rejoice out of their confidence that life is fundamentally good and worth the living on any day. I do find it impressive how those who have gone through rough spots in life, who have lost dearly, who've suffered more than most, often are precisely those who learn over time to take great joy in just being alive. A story is told of a woman in her late 80s whose birth records were destroyed along with everything else she owned in the concentration camps of World War II. She still sheds tears as she describes her experiences in that horrendous setting. She lost all but 2 of her family in the camp. She herself was tortured, disabled. She was within days of death when the camp was liberated. But she says out of that camp experience, she learned a relationship with God and a clarity toward life that in fact even presented problems for a time for her son and daughter-in-law. They thought she was a little bit crazy with her insistence on laughing and singing, causing mischief at play with the grandchildren, otherwise creating turmoil wherever she went. But her family finally came to see that they should be learning from her instead of trying to cope with her. When her physician asked what made her so happy, she said, "I think the question is wrong, doctor. I keep wondering why everybody is too busy to be happy, yet seems to have so much time to be sad. I love life, and I've learned to love it even more as the result of those days when I saw such disrespect of it, such disregard of it. Maybe people just get used to life and living. Well, you don't get used to living when you might die any moment. So I will never take life for granted. I will never miss a minute of it. That's why I guess my family thinks I'm nuts. I want to dance and love and laugh and smile, and they just don't have time for such silliness. Almost everything to them is a problem." But I always ask myself one question. What is the most important thing in the world right now, today? And I always get the same answer: life. Indeed, the word of the angels that God has bent low to somehow participate in ordinary human life on this obscure planet is a word of affirmation that life is good and worth the living, and cause for joy even in the midst of the grime and grief. You know, children know this. They can go from agony to ecstasy, from sadness to joy on a moment's notice. I was watching the other day and I caught sight of some kids in the dusty streets of Kabul, in the midst of that rubble, doing what? Kicking up dust, playing soccer with gusto and cheers. This kind of joy does not exclude the other emotions, but it can sit there. It can sit there even in the midst of tears. And I've seen it in mother at wedding after wedding, sitting right there. Joy comes of embracing life, truly living with all the song and savor within us. And again, simply joy comes of loving, of enjoying one another. You know, our culture with its stress and schedules, its hungers and hurry, seems admirably designed to enable us to avoid one another, to avoid the leisure to meet and know and enjoy. One of the women correspondents in Afghanistan writes back from there at how some of the people she's learned to know there seem to be able to sit at leisure and tea, talking away the late afternoon hours as though the world around them were not falling in on them. I realize something, she writes, that they somehow manage a little quiet and joy just in being together for a few hours, a joy that we somehow seem to miss in the safety and striving of our world. One woman shares her reflections as she watches her newborn sleep one evening. It's late, and as I listen to the silent noises, my mind is something like a huge funnel with a very small opening. There are millions of things that want to come out, and yet they're hampered by the limitations that words seem to place on my feelings. A child has been born and I'm watching her sleep. And right now I have no expectations. How can I have? When she's my age, it'll be 2030, a space odyssey. So only I know the joy of the moment. But I can look back over the past before Jennifer and reflect on those people who brought me to this point in time. I want to say thank you to so many people, but I can't find vocal cords strong enough to shout it or words meaningful enough to say it. There's the child's father, who, like me, is struggling with how to be in life. There are friends who've sung songs, painted pictures, laughed and cried with us and for us. Parents and friends who did the mundane tasks as a way to say they cared. Arms, words, hands, gifts. And now cards come saying, welcome to the child, and I love you to us. I've found new meaning and joy in being thankful for life and love, and a new unbelievable meaning in the joy that there is in the simple birth of a child. Yes, even in this kind of world. Joy comes when we embrace living and loving. Joy comes, I think, when we're able with full heart to say, here is my place, here are my people, here I shall be content to live out my years doing His will as long as He gives me strength and grace. Joy of a life embraced, as even the Christ child embraced it. Joy of a life of love, even as He came to love. And then, and more to the point in the Christmas story, the joy there comes of victory, of winning. The angel pronounces joy in the reality that in Jesus of Nazareth, just 2,000 years ago, God began a final move to take His world back, to conquer everything about this world that stands against His will, to renew us and all creation into a kingdom of feasting and fellowship. Dr. Murdo Edwin MacDonald, a Scot, was a prisoner of war in Germany during the Second World War. One morning, Dr. MacDonald was awakened in the prison camp by a friend who very quietly whispered that he'd been secretly listening to the BBC during the night, and the Allies had landed at Normandy. He whispered only 3 words in Gaelic: "They have come, they have come." Well, MacDonald, quite uncharacteristic for a Scot, threw caution to the winds and ran to the next barracks and began shouting, "They have come, they have come." The response, he says, was instant and incredible. Weak men shouted as they jumped about for joy. Some stood on tables and yelled. Others rolled on the floor in veritable fits of elation. Their German captors, not knowing of the D-Day invasion, thought they had all gone quite mad. MacDonald commented later, "We jubilant Allies were still prisoners within the formerly intimidating walls. Nothing had changed outwardly. None of us knew whether we would even live to see the end. But inwardly, everything was changed. Victory was yet to be accomplished, but we lived in the joy that the invasion had begun and we would win." How could they sing then back in a world ruled by the Herods and terrorized by the Romans, a world then as now of poverty and pain and emptiness and despair? They could sing because they knew the invasion had begun. No matter how dark the night or clouded the way, God had not given up on His earth. They lived in the joy that He would win. And that's what the old story is really all about. What kind of force is it that is still at work behind the scenes, affecting and shaping life in our world today? I almost hesitate to use the word because we've sentimentalized it and robbed it so of its dignity and power. But it is the kingdom of God, which is the kingdom of love. The old word, the good news is that in Jesus, life and death and resurrection, the love of the eternal for every human being has entered inexorably and unavoidably into the human story, and in subtle and subterranean ways it is taking over that story. My friends, there is still a lot of suffering and sin in this world, but there is also a lot of overcoming of suffering and sin. That's why angels and Mary sang. That's why we sing. He's come to be part of life in this world. We sing not because we're sheltered from, oblivious to the trials and troubles of life, but because we know this world is not the last word. God has come in Jesus not so terribly long ago to begin to make it his world again. And it's not the Hitlers and Khomeinis who will win in the end. God will win. That's why we sing joy to this world. And because the ultimate victory is settled for us, we're able in the meantime to win out over our own temporary little battles and skirmishes, confident that he's present there as well, giving us the strength to deal with whatever comes. You know, there is a quiet joy that does come of facing the challenges of life and overcoming them in spirit, if not always in body. Because the one who will ultimately defeat all of the forces of suffering and evil out there is with us in our struggles, and we may overcome and conquer. Henry Nouwen, an inspiration and spiritual guide to so many who died 5 years ago about now, wrote once of a friend who, in a way, was responsible for what Henry had become. I have a friend who radiates joy, not because his life is easy, but because he habitually recognizes the presence of God in the midst of all human suffering, his own as well as others. And my friend's joy is contagious. And the more I'm with him, the more I catch glimpses of the sun shining through the clouds. Yes, I know there's a sun, even though the skies are covered with clouds. While my friend always spoke about the sun, I kept speaking about the clouds, until one day I realized that it was the sun that allowed me to see the clouds at all. Those who keep speaking about the sun while walking under cloudy skies are messengers of hope and joy, the true saints in this or any time. So, joy to the world, your world. The Lord has come, and that's enough.